"Sir, if you eat that steak, you may not walk out of this room." The words were not spoken out loud. They were written in blue ink on a folded receipt, slid across white linen by a waitress nobody at the table had bothered to thank. Alexander Whitmore had faced hostile boardrooms, federal hearings, collapsing markets, and men twice his size who smiled while sharpening knives behind their backs. But that tiny piece of paper stopped him colder than any threat ever had. His fork hovered 3 inches above a 48-ounce dry-aged tomahawk steak, its seared crust glistening beneath the low amber lights of the Sterling Room, the kind of Manhattan steakhouse where a glass of wine could cost more than a week of groceries, and no one ever said the price out loud. Around him, the private dining room continued breathing money. Crystal glasses whispered against polished wood. Silverware clicked softly. A wall of windows held the city high above Fifth Avenue, glittering like it had been purchased and framed for the people inside. At the head of the table, Alexander sat in a charcoal Italian suit, pale hand resting beside a contract worth $2 billion. His name was on buildings, scholarships, hospital wings, and lawsuits. He was 42, white, brilliant, feared, and used to being obeyed before he finished speaking. Men like Alexander did not ask permission from rooms. They entered, and the room adjusted. To his right sat Derek Sloan, his chief financial officer, clean-shaven, silver-tongued, smiling with the relaxed confidence of a man who had already rehearsed his victory. Across from them were 3 investors, 2 attorneys, and a public relations consultant who kept checking her phone under the table. Everyone had come to witness the final signature before midnight. Everyone thought the danger was in the deal. Nobody looked at the plate. Nobody except Maya Bennett. She stood beside Alexander's chair in a black apron and white button-down shirt, her dark skin warm under the chandelier glow, her hair pulled into a neat low bun, her posture straight in the quiet way of someone who had learned that dignity could be carried even when people refused to hand it to you. 27 years old, 6 years in restaurants, 2 years of nursing school before her mother's heart condition turned tuition money into prescription money. Maya knew the sounds of rich rooms, the fake laughter, the casual orders, the way people snapped their fingers without seeing the hand they were calling. Earlier that evening, Alexander had not looked up when he told her his water was not cold enough. Derek had smiled and added, "Just keep it simple, sweetheart." Steak, wine, silence. A few people chuckled because money often teaches cowards when to laugh. Maya said nothing. She refilled the glass. She adjusted the bread plate. She listened, because invisible people hear everything. She saw Alexander take a small white pill from a silver case before dinner. She saw Derek glance at it, then check his watch. She saw the sommelier swap the original bottle for one Derek personally approved. She saw a junior cook step out from the service corridor with a sauce ramekin mint for only 1 plate. And then she saw Derek's face when the steak landed in front of Alexander. Not hunger, not pride, expectation. The kind of look a man wears when he is waiting for a trap to close. Maya's pulse pressed hard against her throat. She had no proof strong enough to shout across a billion-dollar table. No authority, no title, no safety net if she was wrong. But she had seen her mother's lips turn gray once while everyone else thought she was just tired. She had learned the difference between panic and warning. Panic makes noise. Warning pays attention. So Maya took the receipt from her apron pocket, wrote 1 sentence with a steady hand, folded it once, and placed it beside Alexander's wineglass just as he lifted the first bite toward his mouth. He frowned, annoyed before he even read it. Then his eyes moved across the words. The fork stopped. The room kept talking for half a second longer, until Derek noticed. "Everything all right, Alex?" he asked, too quickly. Alexander did not answer. His face did not change much. Men like him trained their expressions the way soldiers train their hands. But Maya saw it. The smallest drain of color beneath his skin. The tightening at his jaw. The first crack in the empire. He looked at the steak. Then at Derek. Then, finally, at Maya Bennett. Really looked at her. As if the woman carrying the plates had suddenly become the only person in the room who mattered. And in that silence, before a single accusation was spoken, everyone at the table felt something shift. The waitress had not raised her voice. She had not made a scene. She had simply handed a king a warning. And for the first time all night, the king was afraid to take a bite. For 1 long second, nobody moved. Not the attorneys with their fountain pens ready. Not the investors with their practiced smiles. Not Derek Sloan, though the muscle near his left eye jumped once before he forced it still. The Sterling Room had gone quiet in the strange way expensive places go quiet. Not with panic, but with control. Even silence wore a tailored suit in that room. Alexander Whitmore lowered his fork slowly until the silver touched the edge of the plate with a soft, clean sound. It was barely louder than a breath, yet every person heard it. Maya stood beside him, hands folded at her waist, face calm, heart moving so fast she could feel each beat in her wrists. She knew what came next could cost her job. Maybe more than that. People like Alexander did not like being warned by people they had not given permission to speak. Derek leaned back and gave a small laugh, the kind meant to teach the room how to react. "Is there a problem with the steak?" he asked, smiling toward Maya without really looking at her. Because I am sure the kitchen would love feedback from the service staff. The attorneys looked down. The public relations consultant froze with her phone halfway under the table. One investor coughed into his napkin. Maya did not answer Derek. She kept her eyes on Alexander, because the note had been for him, and because danger loves distraction. Alexander turned the folded receipt under his thumb, reading the sentence again as if the ink might rearrange itself into something less impossible. Sir, if you eat that, you may not leave this room alive. His first instinct was anger. It rose sharp and familiar. He had built an empire by distrusting surprises. Surprise was weakness. Surprise was a leak in the wall. Surprise was an employee stepping outside her place and forcing him to respond in front of people who measured hesitation like a stock price. He wanted to dismiss her. He wanted to call the manager. He wanted the night back under control. But then he saw Derek's hand, resting on the table, perfectly still except for one finger tapping once against the stem of his wine glass. Alexander knew that tap. Derek did it before earnings calls, before layoffs, before hostile negotiations. He did it when he was waiting for someone else to make the mistake he had planned for them. The room tightened. Alexander set the fork down completely. Maya, is it? He said, reading her name tag for the first time all evening. The sound of her name in his voice made something flicker in her chest. Not pride, not relief, something more complicated. Recognition always feels different when it comes late. Yes, sir, she said. Derek's smile thinned. Alex, we have limited time. The closing documents need signatures before midnight. Alexander did not look away from Maya. Why would you write this? Maya could feel the manager near the service door staring at her like she had dropped a match on a silk curtain. She chose each word carefully. Because I saw something I do not think you saw. Derek laughed again, louder this time. She saw something. Wonderful. Are we holding up a multi-billion-dollar transaction because the waitress had a feeling? There it was. The word. Waitress. Not her name. Not the woman. Not the person who had been 10 feet from every secret in the room. Just the role he thought made her small enough to ignore. Maya turned then, slowly, and looked at Derek for the first time. No, sir, she said. We are holding it up because you watched his pill case before you watched the contract. The laugh died before it reached anyone else. Alexander's eyes shifted, sharp now. One of the attorneys lifted his head. Derek's face stayed composed, but the color around his mouth changed. Maya continued, voice even, not loud, not trembling. Mr. Whitmore took medication before dinner. You noticed it. Then you changed the wine. Then the sauce came out separately, and only for his plate. Every sentence landed like a glass bead dropped onto marble. Small, clear, impossible to ignore. Derek spread his hands, performing innocence for the table. This is absurd. Alexander finally looked at him. Not as a friend. Not as a chief financial officer. As a man suddenly remembering every locked door he had left someone else holding the key to. Outside the private room, the restaurant carried on. Plates moved. Jazz played. Manhattan glittered behind the glass like nothing sacred had shifted. But inside, Maya Bennett stood in her pressed white shirt and black apron. And the richest man at the table was no longer looking at the deal. He was looking at the dinner. Alexander did not raise his voice. That was what made the room colder. Men who truly believed they owned the air rarely needed volume. He leaned back just half an inch, his eyes moving from Maya to Derek, then to the plate between them, the steak still untouched, the sauce shining dark along the edge like it belonged in the room more than she did. Bring the manager, Alexander said. Maya's stomach tightened, not because she had lied, but because truth does not always protect the person brave enough to carry it. The manager appeared almost instantly, a thin man named Paul Harrington with silver hair, a navy suit, and the nervous smile of someone trained to apologize upward and discipline downward. He looked at Alexander first, then Derek, then finally Maya, but only for a second, as if eye contact with her might make him responsible for what happened next. Mr. Whitmore, I am terribly sorry, Paul said. Whatever this is, I will handle it immediately. Handle it. That was the word people used when they wanted a human being turned back into a problem. Maya felt it land on her shoulders. She had heard it before. In hotel kitchens. In hospital waiting rooms. In school offices where financial aid forms disappeared and nobody knew why. Paul turned to her, smile gone. Maya, step outside. She did not move. A tiny rebellion. Barely visible. But in rooms built on obedience, stillness can sound like thunder. Derek tilted his head, pleased now, sensing the old order returning. That would be best, he said, before this becomes embarrassing for everyone. Maya looked at Alexander. Sir, before I leave, ask them to bring the original wine bottle from the service station. Derek's eyes sharpened. Paul frowned. That is not necessary. And ask for the sauce ticket from the kitchen printer, Maya continued. Her voice remained low, but each word carried. The one that shows which plate was modified. The youngest attorney at the table, a woman named Claire Jensen, slowly picked up her pen. Not to sign, to write down what Maya had said. That small movement changed the oxygen in the room. Documentation. The language of powerful people. Suddenly, Maya was not just speaking. She was creating a record. Alexander noticed. So did Derek. You seem very confident, Alexander said. Maya swallowed once. I am not confident, sir. I am careful. The words slipped into the room and stayed there. Careful. That was what nobody expected from a black waitress in a private room full of billionaires and lawyers. They expected nerves, emotion, apology, maybe tears. They did not expect method. They did not expect memory. They did not expect a woman in service shoes to understand that every expensive room leaves a trail. Paul shifted toward the door, trapped between protecting the client and protecting the illusion that nothing bad could happen at the Sterling room. I will check with the kitchen, he said, but his voice had lost its polish. Derek leaned forward, his smile almost friendly now. Maya, is it? I appreciate your concern, but you are making connections that are not there. People take medication. Wine changes. Chefs adjust sauces. That is called dinner. A few minutes earlier, that line might have worked. The room would have laughed. Maya would have been removed. Alexander would have eaten, signed, and thanked Derek for keeping the night efficient. But the note had broken the spell. Once a man sees a crack in the glass, he cannot pretend it is still whole. Alexander turned to Claire. Do not let anyone remove anything from this room. Claire nodded. Derek's jaw tightened. Alex, listen to yourself. Alexander looked back at him. I am. 2 words. Flat. Dangerous. Not violent. Worse for Derek. Controlled. The second attorney reached for his phone and asked for hotel security to preserve kitchen footage. Paul's face went pale at the word footage. Maya finally took one step back, not retreating, only making space for the truth to breathe. She could feel other servers gathering beyond the frosted glass door, shadows passing, whispers rising. For years, she had moved through rooms like this carrying plates heavy with other people's comfort. Tonight, she had carried one folded piece of paper, and it weighed more than silver, more than steak, more than the contract waiting beside Alexander's hand. Derek lifted his wine glass, then seemed to remember everyone was watching and set it down untouched. Alexander saw that too. Maya saw Alexander seeing it. And that was the moment she understood the room had changed sides. Not completely, not safely, but enough. The king had not become kind. Not yet, but he had become awake. The first thing Paul brought back was not proof. It was fear. He entered the private room with 2 servers behind him, his polished shoes moving too carefully across the carpet, his face arranged into the kind of calm that only made panic more obvious. In his right hand was the original wine bottle, wrapped in a white service towel. In his left was a thin strip of kitchen paper from the order printer. He placed both on the side table as if they were delicate antiques, then stepped away from them as though truth might stain his suit. Nobody spoke. Even the jazz beyond the walls seemed softer now, swallowed by the heavy silence of men realizing the night was no longer about profit. Claire Jensen rose from her chair and crossed to the side table. She was young for that room, maybe 32, with careful eyes and a voice that had been trained by courtrooms not to shake. This is the original bottle? She asked. Paul nodded. Yes, ma'am. It was opened at 7:46 this evening, then replaced at Mr. Sloane's request at 7:52. Derek gave a small, impatient sigh, because the first bottle was breathing poorly. Any decent host would know that. Maya did not react. She was watching Alexander's left hand. His thumb had moved near the pill case again, not opening it, just touching the silver edge like a man suddenly aware of his own body. He was not scared of steak. Not really. He was scared of how close he had come to trusting the wrong person. Claire lifted the kitchen ticket. Modified sauce. Table 12 private. Seat 1 only. She looked toward Alexander. Seat 1 is Mr. Whitmore. The words hit the table without drama, but every face changed around them. Seat 1 only. Not the whole party. Not the chef's recommendation. 1 plate. 1 man. 1 carefully designed accident. Derek pushed back his chair just enough for the legs to drag against the floor. The sound made 2 investors flinch. This is ridiculous, he said. A custom sauce is not a crime. Alex has always preferred special treatment. That is not exactly classified information. Alexander's eyes stayed on the ticket. The old version of him would have accepted the explanation because it protected the evening, because it protected the money, because rich men are often surrounded by people paid to turn warnings into inconvenience. But Maya had already planted a question in the center of the room, and it was growing teeth. What was in the sauce? Alexander asked. Paul opened his mouth, then closed it. The kitchen is checking. Maya's voice came from behind him, quiet but clear. Black garlic reduction, red wine glaze, crushed walnut oil, and a citrus extract. Paul turned to her, startled. How would you know that? Because I ran the sauce from the kitchen to the pass before service started, Maya said. It was listed on the prep label. But walnut oil was not on the private dining menu tonight. Derek laughed once, but this time it had no audience. So now she is a chef too? Maya looked at him, and for the first time, there was something in her expression that was not fear, not anger, but a tired kind of disappointment. No, sir. I am a daughter who learned to read labels because my mother has allergies and a heart condition. I am a former nursing student who knows some reactions do not look dramatic at first. They look like dizziness, sweating, shortness of breath, confusion. And if the person has been drinking wine and taking medication, People call it stress until it is too late. The room went still in a new way, not suspicious, ashamed, because everyone there had heard enough to understand the shape of it, even if they did not know the science. Alexander slowly turned the pill case over in his palm. His voice came out lower than before. My medication warning label says to avoid certain compounds and tree nut oils. Claire looked at Derek. Did you know that? Derek smiled, but it barely reached the surface of his face. I know many things about Alex. We have worked together for 9 years. That was not an answer, Claire said. Maya felt the room lean toward her, and it scared her more than being ignored ever had. Being invisible was painful, but being visible was dangerous. Visibility meant every mistake would be magnified, every word weighed, every breath judged. She thought of her mother in their queen's apartment, sitting beside a plastic pill organizer, telling Maya that God did not always send angels with wings. Sometimes he sent people who paid attention. Maya had not felt like an angel when she wrote the note. She had felt like a waitress about to lose rent money. But now Alexander was looking at her, as if she had pulled him back from the edge of something he could not yet name. Paul's phone buzzed. He checked it, and the blood drained from his face. Security has the kitchen footage, he said. They are bringing it up now. Derek's hand went to his cufflink. Once, twice, too fast. Maya saw it. Alexander saw Maya seeing it. And in that small chain of observation, the truth moved closer. The contract still waited beside the untouched steak, pages crisp, numbers enormous, signature line empty. 10 minutes earlier, that document had been the most powerful thing in the room. Now it looked like paper. Just paper. Because a woman in service shoes had noticed what billionaires missed, and a folded receipt had done what money could not. It had stopped the first bite. The footage arrived on a tablet held by a security supervisor who looked as if he wished he had called in sick. He placed it in front of Claire Jensen, then stepped back without a word. The screen was small, barely larger than a menu, but everyone leaned toward it as if the entire city had been reduced to those few inches of light. On the video, the kitchen moved in silent speed. White coats crossing, stainless steel flashing, steam rising in pale clouds. At first, it looked ordinary, almost boring, the hidden machinery behind luxury. Then Maya appeared on the screen near the service pass, carrying a tray of bread plates. She watched herself move through the background like a ghost, present in the room, absent from everyone's attention. Then came the junior cook. He entered from the left, checked over his shoulder, and took a small ramekin from a shelf marked Private Table 12. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just one small container moved from one place to another. That was how betrayal looked when it dressed itself as procedure. Claire paused the video. Who was that? Paul swallowed. Evan Miller. Line cook. 6 months on staff. Derek exhaled through his nose. Are we investigating garnish now? Claire ignored him and pressed play. Evan stepped away from the pass, then stopped as Derek appeared near the kitchen entrance. That detail changed the room. Not because Derek was there, but because he had told everyone he had never left the table except for a phone call in the hallway. On the screen, he spoke to Evan for 9 seconds. No audio, just a white shirt, a dark suit, a brief exchange, and Derek's hand touching Evan's shoulder like a man sealing a private instruction. Alexander went very still, the kind of stillness that made even powerful people nervous. You said you were on a call with London, he said. Derek looked at the tablet, then at Alexander, then around the table, searching for the version of the room that used to belong to him. I stepped near the kitchen because the hallway was loud. The hallway is carpeted, Maya said softly. Everyone turned. She immediately wished she had not spoken, but the truth had already left her mouth. There is no echo by the service entrance. It is one of the quietest places in the restaurant. Derek stared at her, and for a moment his polished mask slipped enough to show what lived underneath it. Not guilt exactly. Contempt. The old kind. The kind that says a woman like Maya was not supposed to remember details that mattered. Claire played the next clip. Evan returned to the pass. He picked up the sauce ramekin, stirred it with a tasting spoon, then added something from a small clear bottle taken from his apron pocket. The bottle was unlabeled. Tiny. Easy to hide. Easy to deny. Paul closed his eyes. One investor whispered, "Good Lord." Maya looked down at her shoes, black and practical, the left sole slightly worn from double shifts. She did not feel victorious. That surprised her. She had imagined, in smaller humiliations, that if truth ever came out, it would feel like sunlight. It did not. It felt heavy. It felt like standing under a spotlight with every mistake of the world asking her to explain why nobody else had noticed. Alexander pushed the tablet away, then looked at Derek. What is in the bottle? Derek's voice hardened. I have no idea. Claire turned to the security supervisor. Where is Evan Miller now? In the staff office, he said. He says Mr. Sloan gave him a cash tip and asked for the sauce to be enhanced with a specialty oil. He claims he did not know anything about medical interactions. The words did not explode. They landed quietly. That made them worse. A cash tip. A private request. A modified sauce. A billionaire with heart medication. A deadline before midnight. The pattern was no longer a shadow. It had a shape. Derek stood then, slow and controlled, buttoning his jacket as if dignity could be restored by tailoring. Alex, this is a misunderstanding being inflated by an employee who clearly wants attention. There it was again. Employee. Not Maya. Not Miss Bennett. Not the woman who had stopped him. Alexander looked at the untouched steak, then at the folded note beside his glass. Something in his face shifted, not toward kindness yet, but toward recognition. He had heard people like Derek speak this way before. In meetings. In hiring committees. In donor rooms. Soft words used like locked doors. He had benefited from those doors without always asking who they kept outside. Say her name, Alexander said. Derek blinked. What? Alexander's voice stayed low. If you were going to accuse her, say her name. Derek's mouth opened, then closed. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of every time Maya had been called sweetheart, girl, service, staff, help, anything except who she was. Maya Bennett. The name sat there, waiting for the room to become decent enough to use it. Derek finally said nothing, and that told Alexander more than any confession could. Alexander did not call security for Derek right away. That surprised everyone, including Maya. He simply folded his hands on the table and studied the man who had sat beside him through 9 years of earnings calls, acquisitions, late-night strategy sessions, and private flights across the country. Derek Sloan had been in boardrooms in Chicago, Los Angeles, Dallas, and Washington, District of Columbia. He had shaken hands with senators, bankers, hospital executives, and men who moved money like weather. He knew Alexander's calendar, his habits, his medication schedule, his weaknesses, the names of people Alexander trusted, and the names of people Alexander forgot. That was the part that made the room so cold. Betrayal is not always a stranger at the door. Sometimes it knows your favorite wine. Sometimes it laughs at your jokes. Sometimes it sits on your right side and reminds you to sign before midnight. Why? Alexander asked. One word. No performance. No thunder. Just a door opening to something ugly. Derek looked around, measuring the room, calculating which face might still be useful. The investors had leaned away from him. The attorneys were writing. Paul stood near the wall, pale and silent. The security supervisor watched the door. Maya stood by the service station with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. Derek was alone now, and men like him hated being alone in public. You are letting a misunderstanding destroy years of work, Derek said. This deal was supposed to protect the company. Alexander's eyes narrowed. From what? Derek's smile twisted, but only slightly. From you. The sentence moved through the room like cold air under a closed door. Claire stopped writing. One investor whispered something under his breath. Alexander said nothing, and somehow that silence made Derek continue. You built Whitmore Capital like it was a kingdom, Derek said, voice low but growing sharper. Then you started talking about patient access, employee equity, community grants, all of it. You were about to give away leverage we spent years building. Maya listened, confused at first, then slowly understanding. This had not been only about money. It had been about control. Alexander had planned to sign a deal that would shift part of Whitmore Capital's healthcare investments toward lower-cost treatment programs and rural clinics. Derek had called it generous in meetings, wasteful behind closed doors, dangerous in private. The board would have removed you eventually, Derek said. Tonight simply made the transition cleaner. Alexander looked at the steak, then back at Derek. Cleaner. The word tasted bitter even from across the room. Derek glanced at Maya then, and there it was again, the resentment he could no longer hide. And none of this would have mattered if she had done her job. Maya felt the old sting rise, familiar as steam from a kitchen sink. Done her job, as if watching, thinking, protecting, remembering, risking herself. None of that counted because she carried plates for a living. Alexander turned slowly toward Derek. She did her job better than anyone in this room. Nobody breathed. Not because Alexander had spoken loudly, but because the sentence landed in a place no one expected him to defend. Maya's throat tightened, but she kept her face still. She had learned a long time ago not to let powerful people see what their words could do to her, even the decent ones. Derek laughed once, empty and sharp. You are making her a hero because it saves you from admitting you were blind. Alexander flinched. Not much. Enough. Because it was true. Not the way Derek meant it, but true all the same. He had been blind. Not to numbers. Not to markets. Not to risk. He could read a balance sheet like a cardiologist reading a monitor, but he had failed to read people. He had failed to see the quiet woman refilling his water. He had failed to see the contempt sitting beside him. Maya saw the realization cross his face, and for the first time that night, Alexander Whitmore looked less like a billionaire and more like a man standing in front of a mirror he could not buy his way around. Claire closed her notebook. Mr. Sloan, for your own protection, you should not say another word without counsel. Derek's expression hardened. I know my rights. Then use them quietly, Alexander said. The security supervisor stepped forward, not touching him, simply indicating the door. Derek adjusted his cufflinks, lifted his chin, and walked out under the gaze of everyone he had expected to command. No dramatic scene. No shouting. No chaos. Just a man leaving a room that had stopped believing him. When the door closed, the quiet that followed was different. Not safe. Not healed. but emptied of poison. Alexander looked down at the folded note again. The ink had smudged slightly where his thumb had pressed too hard. Then he looked at Maya. "Miss Bennett," he said, and this time her name sounded like an apology, trying to learn how to stand. "You saved more than my life tonight." Maya held his gaze. "I only wrote what everyone else should have noticed. And that, more than the note, more than the footage, more than Derek's confession wrapped in pride, was what left Alexander frozen." The room did not return to normal after Derek left. Rooms like that never do. They pretend. They straighten napkins, refill glasses, smooth jackets, and wait for someone powerful to tell them what reality is supposed to be. But the center of the evening had already moved. It was no longer the contract beside Alexander's hand. It was not the steak cooling beneath the chandelier light. It was Maya Bennett, standing near the side table in service shoes, suddenly carrying the weight of a truth nobody rich enough had wanted to see. Paul Harrington cleared his throat first. "Mr. Whitmore, I apologize on behalf of the Sterling Room. We will of course remove the entree and prepare anything you would like." Alexander looked at him as if the words had come from very far away. Anything you would like. That had been the language of his life. Private entrances, corner suites, dedicated staff, quiet fixes. He had spent years believing convenience was proof of importance. Tonight, convenience had nearly hidden a crime in a sauce ramekin. "No," Alexander said. "Leave it." Paul blinked. "Sir, leave everything exactly where it is until investigators see it." The word investigators changed the room again. Not gossip, not misunderstanding, not a service issue. A record, a consequence. Claire nodded and began making calls from the far corner, her voice low and precise. The investors whispered among themselves, already protecting their distance from Derek, rewriting their memories in real time. They had always had concerns. They had noticed something off. They had never fully trusted him. That was how powerful people survived scandal. They moved their loyalty before the ink dried. Maya watched them and felt a tired sadness settle inside her. Not shock. She had seen this kind of shifting before. In smaller rooms, with smaller stakes. A customer was rude until the manager arrived. A coworker made a joke until human resources asked questions. A donor ignored a patient until a camera appeared. People did not always become better when truth entered the room. Sometimes they simply became careful. Alexander saw her watching them. "You do not look surprised," he said. Maya glanced at him. "I work in restaurants, sir. I have seen people change their stories before the check comes." A breath of uncomfortable laughter almost rose, but no one dared finish it. Alexander did not laugh. He absorbed the sentence because it was aimed at more than the room. It was aimed at a world where people like Maya were expected to remember every preference, every allergy, every insult, and still be treated as background. Paul stepped closer to Maya, lowering his voice. "Maya, you should take the rest of the night off. Paid, of course." It sounded generous. It was not. It was removal wrapped in politeness. Maya knew it. Alexander knew it 1 second later, and the delay embarrassed him. "She stays," he said. Paul froze. Maya turned to Alexander. "Careful. Mr. Whitmore, I do not need special treatment." "That is not what this is." "Then what is it?" Her question was soft, but it held the room still. Alexander looked at the note. The steak. The empty chair where Derek had been. Then back at her. "A witness should not be sent away because her testimony makes powerful people uncomfortable." Maya studied him. For the first time, she heard something in his voice that was not command. It was effort. A man learning a language he should have known already. Respect. Claire returned to the table. "The police are on their way. I also contacted your medical team. They want you checked tonight, even without symptoms." Alexander nodded, but his gaze remained on Maya. "How did you know about the medication interaction?" Maya hesitated. The room waited. She did not owe them her story. That was the first thing she reminded herself. Pain is not a performance. Struggle is not identification you show at the door to prove you belong. But then she thought of her mother, of orange prescription bottles lined along a kitchen windowsill in Queens, of long bus rides to community college, of studying anatomy in laundromats, of dropping out not because she lacked talent, but because survival sent a bill with her name on it. "My mother has a heart condition," she said, "and I studied nursing at LaGuardia Community College before I had to stop." Alexander's expression shifted. "Had to." Maya gave him a small look. Not angry. Worse. Knowing. Life gets expensive when no one is underwriting your mistakes. The sentence landed quietly, but it took the polish off every expensive object in the room. Alexander had underwritten plenty of mistakes. His own, Derek's, the company's. Entire strategies that failed upward because the people behind them wore the right suits and knew the right donors. But Maya had not been allowed even one clean fall. She had carried consequences immediately, personally, in cash, in rent, in medicine, in time. Outside the frosted glass, red and blue lights began to flicker faintly against the hallway walls, softened by distance and wealth. The city had arrived at the door. Alexander stood slowly. This time, when he faced Maya, he did not look over her shoulder. He did not look through her. He looked directly at her, and the whole room noticed because men like Alexander taught rooms what to notice. "Miss Bennett," he said, "when this is over, I would like to hear about what you were studying." Maya did not smile. Not yet. When this is over, she said, I would like you to remember that I was worth hearing before I saved you. Alexander's face went still, not frozen from fear this time, frozen from the truth. And for once, he had no defense ready. The police did not rush into the Sterling room like they did in movies. They arrived quietly, professionally, through the private entrance beside the coat check, 2 detectives in dark coats, and 1 uniformed officer who spoke with Paul near the door. That made the whole thing feel more real. Not dramatic. Real. Maya stood beside the service station while Claire gave a careful timeline. The security supervisor provided the footage, and Alexander answered questions with the controlled precision of a man who had spent his life avoiding legal mistakes. Derek Sloan was not in the room anymore, but his absence remained like a stain on the empty chair. Every person looked at it, and then looked away. The steak was sealed in a container. The wine bottle was labeled. The sauce ramekin was photographed, bagged, and carried out as evidence. It was strange to watch luxury become a crime scene without breaking a single glass. White linen stayed white. Candles kept burning. The city kept shining beyond the windows. That was the lesson Maya had learned long ago. Terrible things did not always announce themselves with chaos. Sometimes they sat quietly at tables with perfect lighting and waited for people to be too polite to notice. One detective, a calm black woman named Renee Walker, approached Maya with a notebook in her hand and warmth in her eyes that did not feel performative. Miss Bennett, I know this has been a long night, she said. I just need you to tell me what you saw in your own words. In your own words. Maya almost smiled at that. All evening, men had tried to shrink her words, question them, manage them, remove them, polish them into something less dangerous. Now the truth was asking for her voice exactly as it was. So she spoke. She described the pill case, the wine change, the private sauce, Derek near the kitchen entrance, Evan at the pass, the way Alexander's plate had been handled differently from every other plate. She did not embellish. She did not perform. She did not make herself sound braver than she had felt. She told the truth the way she had lived it, steady, observant, exact. Detective Walker listened without interrupting, and that alone nearly broke something open in Maya. Across the room, Alexander watched. Not because he wanted to control the statement, because he was finally understanding what attention looked like when it was given instead of demanded. Maya Bennett had noticed everything he had missed, and now everyone with authority was building the night around her memory. When the detective finished, she closed her notebook. You did the right thing. Maya nodded, but the words did not land easily. People loved to say that after the danger passed. You did the right thing. They rarely said it during the moment when doing the right thing could cost rent, work, reputation, and safety. Paul hovered nearby, twisting his wedding ring, desperate to repair whatever could still be repaired. Maya, he said softly, I should have listened sooner. She looked at him. The apology was small. Maybe sincere. Maybe necessary. Maybe both. Yes, she said. Just one word. He lowered his eyes. Alexander heard it and felt the weight of its simplicity. Yes. Not thank you. Not it is fine. Not to not worry about it. A clean confirmation that harm had happened and should not be brushed away because everyone was uncomfortable now. Then Claire returned with news from Alexander's medical team. They wanted him taken to a private clinic for testing, and they strongly advised he not sign anything that night. The deal was paused. The billion-dollar room exhaled in disbelief. For some people, that was the tragedy, not the betrayal, not Maya's warning, not the quiet contempt that had nearly covered everything. The pause deal. Alexander saw it on their faces, and for the first time, he felt embarrassed by the world he had built around himself. The documents can wait, he said. People cannot. The sentence sounded simple, but in his mouth it felt like a wall cracking. Maya looked at him then. She did not forgive him. Not yet. Forgiveness was too expensive to hand out just because a rich man had learned one lesson under pressure. But she saw the beginning of something. A man standing at the edge of his own arrogance, finally looking down. Detective Walker stepped toward the door, then turned back. Miss Bennett, we may need a formal statement tomorrow. I will be there, Maya said. Alexander reached for his coat, then stopped beside the untouched table. He picked up the folded receipt, the one with Maya's warning, now creased from his fingers. May I keep this? He asked. Maya thought for a moment. Only if you remember it was not magic, she said. It was a warning you almost ignored. Alexander closed his hand around the paper. Outside, the lights of the police cars moved across the frosted glass like slow blue waves. Inside, the richest man in the room stood with no signature, no dinner, no certainty, and one folded receipt that had become heavier than his entire empire. By the time Alexander Whitmore left the Sterling room, the cameras outside had already found the story. Not all of it. Not the truth. Not yet. Just pieces. A billionaire escorted to a clinic. A halted for $2 billion deal. A chief financial officer under investigation. A black waitress questioned by detectives after stopping a private dinner from becoming something far worse. By morning, the internet had done what it always does. It turned fragments into fire. The first video came from a busboy who had filmed only 10 seconds through the frosted glass. Just enough to show Alexander standing beside Maya, while detectives sealed the untouched plate. Then came the headlines. Some were careful, some were cruel. Some called Maya a hero. Some called her lucky. Some asked why a waitress had been close enough to notice what executives missed. That question stayed with Alexander longer than any headline. He sat in a private clinic on the Upper East Side, wearing the same white dress shirt from the night before, the collar open now, the billionaire armor slightly loosened. The doctors had cleared him. No reaction. No damage. No symptoms. On paper, he was fine. But paper had lied to him before. The contract had looked clean. Derek's reports had looked clean. His foundation's public image had looked spotless under bright lights and donor applause. Then Claire Jensen entered with a tablet, her face serious in the gray morning light. "You need to see this," she said. It was an internal archive from 3 years earlier, pulled during the emergency review of Derek's communications and foundation records. Maya Bennett's name sat near the top of a scholarship applicant list. Former nursing student. High grades. Strong recommendations. Financial hardship. Caregiver for mother with chronic heart disease. Alexander read each line slowly, already feeling the room around him disappear. Then he saw the note attached to her file. "Not the image we want representing the foundation." 6 words. No signature on the visible preview. No explanation. Just a locked door disguised as administrative judgment. Alexander stared at the screen. The same woman who had saved his life had once asked his company for a chance, and his company had answered with a sentence that reduced her future to appearance. He had not written it. That was the first defense his mind reached for. He had not reviewed her file. He had not seen her name. He had not sat in that committee room. But the defense collapsed before it could stand. His name was on the building. His portrait hung in the lobby. His speeches filled the fundraising dinners. His power had created the culture where someone could write those words and expect the system to agree. Claire watched him quietly. "Derek oversaw several foundation selection committees that year," she said. Alexander closed his eyes for a moment. The folded receipt was still in his jacket pocket, creased and soft now from being touched too many times. He took it out and placed it beside the tablet. 2 notes. One had nearly saved him. One had quietly harmed her. The difference was mercy. The difference was who held the pen. Later that afternoon, he returned to the Sterling room, not through the private entrance, but through the front door. The restaurant was closed between lunch and dinner, chairs stacked along one wall, sunlight replacing the amber glow that had made everything look expensive the night before. Maya was there with Detective Walker near the bar, finishing a formal statement. She wore a simple gray sweater now, not the uniform, and somehow that made Alexander feel even more ashamed. Without the apron, without the tray, without the role he had used to ignore her, she was simply a young woman who had been carrying more than anyone had bothered to ask. He waited until the detective left. Then he walked toward Maya slowly, stopping several feet away, giving her the space powerful men rarely understood they took up. "Miss Bennett," he said, "I found your scholarship file." Her face changed, but only slightly. A blink. A breath. A wall rising where a wound had already learned to protect itself. "Then you found what your foundation thought of me." Alexander nodded. No denial. No excuse. "Yes." The word cost him less than it should have, but more than any check ever had. "I am sorry." Maya looked at him for a long moment. For last night." "For last night," he said. "For 3 years ago. For the people who used my name to decide you did not belong. And for the fact that I did not build something strong enough to stop them." The room held still. No cameras. No investors. No applause waiting to make the apology useful. Just a man with money and a woman with the truth. Maya did not soften quickly. That would have made the world too easy. "An apology does not give those years back," she said. Alexander nodded again. "No, it does not." Then he placed a folder on the bar, but did not push it toward her like a gift. "This is a full independent review of the foundation, a public release of the findings, and funding for every qualified applicant rejected under that committee, including you, if you choose to return to nursing school. No condition. No photo opportunity. No speech." Maya looked at the folder, then back at him. "And if I say no, then it still happens." That was the first answer that reached her. Not because it fixed anything. Because it did not ask her to be grateful before justice was done. She picked up the folded receipt from the bar where Alexander had placed it. Her warning. Her handwriting. Her courage in blue ink. "You kept it," she said. "Yes." "Why?" Alexander looked around the restaurant, at the tables, the linen, the polished silver, the places where people with money mistook service for silence. "Because last night I ordered dinner like a man who thought power meant being served," he said. "You reminded me power means being responsible for what happens in the room." Maya held his gaze. She did not smile for him. She did not rescue him from discomfort. But she nodded once, small and clear. That was all. And maybe that was enough for the beginning. Because redemption is not a spotlight. It is not a check. It is not a headline polished until guilt looks generous. Redemption is what remains after the room goes quiet and no one is clapping. Alexander Whitmore had entered the Sterling room believing he owned the night. Maya Bennett had walked through it carrying plates, warnings, memory, and grace. He had money. He had influence. He had a name that opened doors. But she had the one thing his empire could not manufacture. She saw the truth before it was too late. And she had the courage to write it down.